Now, we're still 9 months away from the presidential election in Mexico, but one outcome is already pretty clear. The next head of state of the country is almost certainly going to be a woman, because for the first time ever, the country's two main political movements have put forward female candidates. Well, let's get some more analysis, and we can speak to Andrew Rudman, who is director of the Mexico Institute at the Wilson Center in DC. Thank you for joining us. First of all, how significant is it, do you think, that the next president of Mexico is almost certainly going to be a woman?
Well, it is, of course, significant, as you said, because it will be the first time. And given that these are the two main parties, it's extremely likely, as you said, that it will indeed be a woman. And I think that's important. But I think, it is also important to keep in mind that the political parties are all run by men. Many of the decisions are made by men. So I think this is a great step forward, but we have to be careful that we not conclude that everything is fixed and perfect. Mexico is still a country driven by machismo, and it will be a struggle, I think, for both candidates to establish themselves or to attract votes. But it is, of course, really a great moment for Mexico.
Yeah, you mentioned machismo, and that is presumably one of the answers to my next question, which is what's taken so long?
Well, that's a good question. Of course, Mexico's not the only place that hasn't elected a woman president. We haven't here in the United States either. Mexico, during its political reforms in the late 90s and 2000s, changed the rules and has increased the ratio of women who have to be put forward as candidates. So Mexico actually has one of the highest rates of female participation or female elected officials in the world, far higher than the United States. So I suppose from that perspective, it was a matter of time, but I think it probably took a while for women to get into the political establishment and work their way up, as is true of both of these candidates who started out with lower level positions.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier on that it's not going to be easy for either of them. It's not going to be plain sailing. Tell us a bit more about who these two women are and which one you think perhaps stands a better chance than the other.
Sure. Claudia Sheinbaum, who was chosen by the governing Morena party yesterday, is a former mayor of Mexico City. She is known as a protege of Andrés Manuel López Obrador, or AMLO. She has a PhD in environmental engineering, so she's a technocrat by training, and as I said, was governed Mexico City. Her opponent, Xóchitl Gálvez, comes from much more humble beginnings, although she too was educated and became really a tech mogul, and has done very well in the IT space. So you have two women who, though they come from different backgrounds, both are technocrats in a way that current President López Obrador is not. So I think one thing that we may see is policies developed with more analysis and more response. Someone put it recently, when tech issues are explained, the new president is likely to understand them and be used to having those conversations. So that may be different from President López Obrador, who has a much more political or maybe emotional approach to issues.
As well as talking about women candidates and the likelihood of a woman president there in Mexico, I wanted to talk to you about a women's issue, a women's rights issue. And of course, women's rights increasingly under discussion there in Mexico. And in the last 24 hours or so, abortion very much under discussion. What's the latest on that?
The Supreme Court of Mexico decriminalized abortion. It had been an issue decided by the states, and several had legalized it. But now the court has decreed that to criminalize it is limit somebody's personal or human rights. And so while it can still be illegal on paper in some states, nobody can be prosecuted for having an abortion. And as I sit here in Washington, you can't help but compare that to the conversation in the United States, where we're moving toward more or efforts to have more federal restriction. And in Mexico, you saw exactly the opposite.
Yeah, so obviously the United States going in a totally different direction to South America. And just staying south of the border, south of the Mexican border, I mean, are you seeing a shift in regional attitudes sort of more broadly? Or would you say Mexico is perhaps something of an exception to the rule with regards to its attitudes towards abortion and the fact that it could soon have a female president? Okay, it looks like the line has frozen. Andrew, I don't think... are you still there? You are still there? You are. Let me put that question to you again. Let me put that to you one more time.
I'm sorry.
You froze for a moment. I was just going to ask you whether you thought Mexico was the exception to the rule, or whether other countries in South America were perhaps heading in the same direction, perhaps on track to have a female president, and also becoming more tolerant on this issue of abortion that we were just talking about.
That's a great question. Of course, some countries in South America have had women presidents, but Brazil, Argentina come to mind immediately. So I think, in that sense, maybe Mexico isn't setting a trend. And maybe, to be honest, and if you forgive me, this is a bit trite, when we're not asking whether it's a trend is when you'll see that it really is normal, and we don't think about is the person male or female. There are lots of conversations around the hemisphere on these questions of women's rights and abortion and LGBTQ rights. So I think I don't know that I'd say Mexico is a trendsetter, but Mexico demonstrates or is another example where these issues remain really salient political issues, and countries are going to have pretty forceful, heated debates, I think, going forward about how they want to address them. Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us. Andrew Rudman, Director of the Mexico Institute at the Wilson Center in DC. Thank you.